the young ones know this very well, I'm sure. So, okay, I think we're ready to go. It's good to be back with you. I helped lead off the first webinar of the year. If you recall, you had a series in early January, mid-January, about specifications. And the first one of those was on procurement and difficulties in coordinating getting bidding documents out the door, but also problems that I'm seeing in the industry generally that sort of complicate the whole bidding process. So today's focus, we're going to focus more so on the FIDIC form of contract and how they're applied internationally to hydropower projects. You've seen this slide before. I used it before, and my co-presenter is going to be Christian Groskopf, who's calling in from Ethiopia. The picture of the dam on the right is one he is quite fond of, I know. That's where I met him, was on Mohali Dam in the small African country of Lesotho. And we worked together on that project for 4 years, the one that's pictured there. I'm presently involved in a number of powerhouse rehabilitation projects, and one of the ongoing ones is Mangla in Pakistan, which is a little older than Salto Grande. Okay, outline today, our first hour, we're going to cover forms and sources of contract. And I'm going to get into a discussion as to FIDIC and what it is, and the various aspects that go into preparing a contract, bidding documents based on FIDIC terms and conditions. And I'll finish it with a sample powerhouse rehabilitation project, and show you some useful resources. The second hour will be by Christian Groskopf, and I understand we'll have time for a very brief break between the two sessions at the top of the hour. Okay, common forms of contract. From my prior procurement presentation, I identified these. There's the design, bid, build approach, which is pretty much the traditional approach frequently used on large civil works projects. And it uses FIDIC Red Book, which I'll get into in a little more detail. But I also list other ways that we sometimes implement design, bid, build projects. The second group there, design build approaches, that's the one you're going to be more so interested in, especially FIDIC Yellow Book or forms of contract like that are traditionally used for transmission lines, for powerhouse works, basically anywhere where you get a lot of electromechanical work. And there are other variations of design build approaches as well. I'm not going to dwell much on partnering arrangements in this particular seminar. And then basically we're kind of limited as to our imagination as to a form of contract. The problem is when you start inventing things that are brand new, you may be running into trouble. But the industry does have certain standard conditions of contract, namely for dredging works, underground works, and that sort of thing. I know the mining industry has their own form of contract as well. So going from there to the sources of contracts. We have FIDIC is perhaps the most common standard form of contract used internationally. A nice thing about those is um, they're intended to engage international bidders. Contractors are familiar with them. The large mechanical electrical equipment suppliers are familiar with them. And those FIDIC conditions are often used by the World Bank and other large financial institutions. Examples might be the Inter-American Development Bank will base certain conditions on that. The African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank. There's a number of institutions that use that. More so at a local level, you have national engineering societies and trade organizations, which create their own standard forms of contract. A disadvantage with those is they may not be used much outside the country. So if you're involved in a multinational effort in order to implement a contract, those are not necessarily the best way to go. Some clients have their own standard forms of contract that they use from project to project, or whatever was used on the last project. Sometimes not a whole lot of thought goes into those. There's a tradition. If we are simply repeating it from job to job, and you may not be looking always at the latest developments in the industry that way. Various governmental agencies have their own specific contracts as well. And the last category here, I find on the international front, if something isn't FIDIC or FIDIC-based contracts, say based on the World Bank or something, we have bespoke contracts, and those are often custom contracts drafted by lawyers. And these will tend to vary all over the place. They're very specifically tailored to the client and the project, which is something we do eventually with the FIDIC forms of contract anyhow. The big difference is these things will differ all over the place depending on the author. So those exist as well. And for international work, sometimes the big question is, do you go with a FIDIC-based contract, or do you go with something custom made by a lawyer? And my next few slides here address that issue. And the choice is whether to go with a lawyer's standard form of contract, or say any industry standard, whether it's national or international. And either way you choose, the contractual terms will need to be modified to suit the project's and the owner's particular needs. So even though I mentioned earlier a lawyer drafted contract may sound custom, basically all contracts end up being customized to the project. A third bullet point there, bespoke contracts tend to be more commonplace for private owners and when there's no bidding involved. Standard contracts are more common for public owners and where competitive bidding is desired. Often with bespoke contracts, those tend to be used quite frequently. When I say private owners, they're negotiating directly with a preferred contractor. They're frequently not letting something out to bid. And we have greater complications when things are competitively bid. You have a whole industry trying to get used to what is being proposed in form of terms and conditions, and it tends to slow things down. I get into that a little more here on subsequent slides. Bespoke contracts tend to favor one party over the other, depending on which lawyer drafted it. If the lawyer is being employed by Salto Grande, he's most likely going to write it to defend Salto Grande. That's not always a desirable thing. And I'll get into why that is. But if you look at it from another perspective, if the manufacturer's or contractor's lawyer were to draft a contract, rest assured you're going to have to pore over every last detail there. It requires a whole lot of work, and so generally there's much advantage to starting out with something that's equitable in the first place. Bespoke contracts take longer to implement. Each lawyer has their own preferences, which the other parties may not be familiar with. This means they will take longer to review, to integrate the technical requirements with them. To bid, everybody's got to get up to speed on custom language instead of standard language, and negotiate. And I've seen a project where it goes on for 6 months to a year, the whole negotiation stage, because somebody decided to go with a very custom contract. And also, as bespoke contracts tend to be less equitable, they attract exceptions from bidders, which further slows down the negotiation and contract award processes. A contractor is not going to be interested in going broke on your project. He wants something that's fair from the onset. And when people look at bidding documents and they see the terms and conditions are something they're already familiar with, their biggest effort is using their cost estimators and their engineers to develop the bid. When you use bespoke contracts, the lawyers get involved. And again, that slows down the process. And nobody wants to lose money on a project. So they may give you a bid, and even if you disallow any exceptions to the bid, they may put them in there anyhow, figuring, well, if you're not going to buy it, we don't want your contract anyhow. And that just complicates things, complicates bid evaluations. Bespoke contracts tend to be more adversarial in tone. Bidders tend to submit higher prices to cover contingencies and or submit exceptions or not bid at all. And that's particularly scary if your group of bidders is somewhat limited. You can't afford to lose any bidders. And again, the idea here is try to make it as simple as you can for yourself. Standard contracts, FIDIC and others, tend to be more equitable since they are widely known and time is saved during all procurement phases. Time is not wasted arguing industry standard contracting approaches. Okay. Sometimes these standard contracts are publicly mandated on the public owners. And I think the rest of the point I made there under my first bullet point is been already made on earlier slides. The best form of contract is the one that makes most business sense, the one that will deliver the best cost, time, and quality outcomes. You don't want both parties camped in a position where they're trying to defend themselves against risks that they can't really control. So the decision as to the type of contract you start out with, FIDIC or some other standard, or a bespoke contract, it needs to be a business decision, not so much a legal decision. I wouldn't leave it up to the lawyers. Management should dictate to the lawyers which way you want to go. You don't need the extra headaches associated with a bespoke contract. And the best looking bespoke contracts I've ever seen were all based on industry standard contracts anyhow. But again, you're trying to save time in the process. Another nice thing about standard contracts, many of these have a long track record and are easier to administer and adjudicate. And they tend to remain fairly modern. The industry changes these things to suit problems. And we've got FIDIC in recent years has modified their standard suite of contracts, and it's an ongoing process. So you got the experts in the field continually working on these things. So you're working on the latest and best standards that way. Okay, I'm going to move on from there. Who and what is FIDIC? View FIDIC as sort of like the international, view them as the United Nations somewhat, with a bunch of engineering societies as a part of it. Many African nations and Asian nations that are developing tend to be members of FIDIC. So are many European nations, pretty much all of them, and North American nations as well. I looked down the list of member countries in South America, and they currently include Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Costa Rica, Mexico. But there's roughly 100 other countries. So you figure many major countries are already a member of it. Those that produce the manufacturers and the contractors all tend to be part of these member countries as well. So their views are represented already. And there's already been, give and take between the engineering, the owner, and the contracting industries. So another nice thing about FIDIC is they produce not only standard forms of contract, but other useful things like position papers, training manuals, training resource kits, that sort of thing. They get into specific areas like quality, risk management, business integrity. That's been a big issue the last 10 years to combat corruption. They also provide training, which is another beautiful thing about FIDIC. It's not just FIDIC, but people who practice FIDIC. We'll put on webinars similar to this. What Christian and I are doing is only covering a 2-hour span. One could continue teaching all-day sessions going for multiple days, and I've been through those myself, and I've also helped teach a few of those myself. So there's a lot of knowledge already here in the FIDIC field, and FIDIC itself can provide you resources to help you. Okay, why use FIDIC forms of contract? They're accepted globally. Equitable terms and conditions based on proven industry practices, and have been improved as they go along, as I mentioned. They have different contract formats for different applications. They cover all the main contract forms. Some of those on my earlier list, they're still developing new ones, and they're becoming more industry specific as well. So they are very quite cutting edge there. They have standardization across contract forms, and that's handy in that some things, it doesn't matter what the form of contract is, certain things are consistent from contract to contract, like time to pay a contractor, for example, certain processes like that. And a nice thing about that is if you have multiple contracts on a single project, you don't have these ultra customized contracts. It just sort of renders administration of multiple contracts on a single project a lot easier also. Christian will later get on to disputes avoidance and adjudication. And in being equitable, it talks about processes, FIDIC does, how to resolve issues. It becomes a cookbook of sorts. People have certain deadlines to make decisions in, for example. So it helps coach you through that process, and disputes are natural. You're going to run into them in every project. Nothing ever goes as smoothly as planned, and especially a powerhouse rehabilitation project. You're going to discover things that you had no idea were going to be a problem until you started taking apart the units. And nice thing with this disputes avoidance process is you can set ways of beyond the contract itself, set ways for an outside group of consultants to coach you to avoid these major claims from arising. Claims are going to arise, just as we all have. Many of us have husbands or wives. You know, you said I do at some point. It doesn't mean that was it, and life was blissful after that. You know, disputes are natural. They're going to happen, and you have to know how you're going to deal with those issues. And here in recent years, especially, FIDIC has been giving guidance on certain current world events, supply chain issues, COVID, a number of the issues that I mentioned in my earlier seminar on procurement issues. And as I mentioned earlier, they're revised periodically based on extensive track record. These things are used in many different countries, and some headaches on projects tend to be once off. They're unique to the project. But if there's anything wrong with the terms and conditions, at least those are being modified. So when the next one is rolled out, the a number of these issues are taken care of. Okay.
Hi, Dietmar.
Yes.
Hello, Dietmar. Ignacio here. Regarding the disputes, I think what FIDIC states it's like a third party to
Right.
Yeah, and I was wondering how is that third party contracted? It's like I guess it must be a consultancy company, but that it's not involved with you, with the owner or the contractor. And is there a list of consultancy companies that does that that job, or you need to find it on your own? How does that work?
Can I come in there quickly?
Yeah,
I'm
second hour
addressing
will
that
cover it.
I'm addressing that in my part, and let's keep the question until then.
Yeah. Yeah, Christian will answer it. The short answer is yes.
Good,
Neutrals.
perfect.
And some clients would rather not go that way, and there's different ways of doing it also. And each project is unique, and who you select for that would be both parties have got to agree to it. But I'll avoid that for now. I just want to make it through this initial presentation on FIDIC. But yes, it's important to know how to resolve these things up front. And the very fact that you have a process alone sends comfort to people bidding the project, that there's going to be some fair process down the road. If all falls apart, I don't have to load up my bid price considerably with contingencies. The contingencies I will deal with under this other forum here, and we can hammer that out ourselves. The whole world has changed that way. When I first broke into this industry some 45 plus years ago, it was a different world. The contractors basically had to price in all of these risks, and it's a very volatile business to be in. Construction contracting is. They in restaurants tend to have the biggest amount of business failures. They can have a wonderful track record, but all they have to do is have one or two bad jobs and they're out of business. And nobody wants to be in that position. And you don't want them loading up their pricing for your project to create that problem. So to create the problems of needless extra costs. So I'll move on. FIDIC's primary form of contracts, the big three are the red book, the yellow book, and the silver book. And the red book is primarily for civil works contracts that are designed by the owner's engineer. The silver book is the other extreme. It is a form of design build contract called EPC. It's turnkey. And there the contractor is exclusively responsible for the design. It tends to be more frequently used for civil contracts, so I've seen it also used for electromechanical. In between those two extremes is the yellow book, which is design build itself, but it's providing, much as the silver book, employers' requirements which tend to be more prescriptive, specifications of sorts that are going to be more prescriptive than the silver book and allow the owner to have a greater level of control over the end product. Whereas the silver book, you let the contractor go, you're sometimes looking over his shoulder. With the yellow book, you're very much looking over his shoulder. The yellow book, as I mentioned earlier, is frequently used for powerhouses and transmission lines. You want that opportunity to be able to have an input in the construction process. And yellow book allows you that. Time is money. Time is money on our projects, and quality is money as well. The powerhouse itself is where the money is made on this huge investment that Salto Grande made at some point, which included a dam, which just in itself doesn't generate revenue. The revenue is all in your hydroelectric units. That's what's producing that. And that, if that's all you're working on, boy, you want to make sure they get that right. And not only that, you you want to be able to stop him if he's doing something wrong, and exercise a little greater control. So I would strongly suggest the Yellow Book is available in Spanish from FIDIC, and it might be a good idea for a number of you to go ahead and order a hard copy of it. They're very ticklish about their copyright, FIDIC is, and sometimes it's just easier to get the hard copy. It's less expensive, and it's they're very well put together books. There are other forms of contract. I mentioned the different colors here. There's one called the Emerald Book, which is somewhat like the Yellow Book, but it's geared more toward underground works. It contains certain elements that you might find unknown conditions. Say if one is tunneling, you don't know what conditions you're tunneling under. Well, same is true with tearing apart an existing hydro unit and trying to refurbish it. We've got unknowns too. So there are principles there that are useful. The main one, however, is the Yellow Book. There's enough differences between underground works and powerhouse works where you need condition assessments and that sort of thing that will reduce your risk. And there's a lot more planning you can do with and contingency planning you can do with electromechanical work than there is with tunneling work. Tunneling work, you're bound to hit much more major surprises. There's a Green Book, which is for smaller construction contracts, not as bureaucratic, not as much paper involved. The White Book, some of you are familiar with, consulting engineers. That's how owners engage some consulting engineers if you don't have your own. And there are many others that are under development. I mentioned dredging earlier, that has its own color. There are the bank harmonized copies, those are pink and blue. The list just keeps going on, but there's a lot of good resources there. When you purchase one of these books, and I suggest you get a supply of these Yellow Books on hand, they're not that expensive and they're very quick to deliver them. When you get them, a tip, yes.
Gabriel's got his hand up.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Dietmar and Christian. No, just to tell you that we already bought the Yellow Book, and we already have taken the decision to use Yellow Book in our future contracts.
Okay.
The main two contract that we be doing in the second phase of the project will be using the Yellow Book.
Yeah, okay. I'll speed over a few slides then.
Okay. No, a small hint, additional hint. Everything that you could highlight to us about the Yellow Book, it will be very interesting to us because we are using that book.
Okay. Okay. I was not aware a decision was already made that way. Okay. Very good. I'll speed through the next few slides and focus more so on my example. Each of these FIDIC contract books, regardless of color, it's not just the general conditions, but they actually show you how to implement these things. They're not going to show you how to do it for the sake of a specific project. And powerhouse rehabilitation projects have their own specific needs that will need to inform the particular conditions which supplement the general conditions. Okay, parts of the overall bidding / contract documents. Some of these I already covered under the January webinar, instructions to bidders, engaging contractors and such. And my focus today is primarily, of course, on the general, and now I'm heading more into the particular conditions and customizing the FIDIC conditions. FIDIC's golden principles are as follows. Duties, rights, obligations, roles, responsibilities of the participants must be generally as implied in the general conditions and appropriate to the requirements of the project. They don't want you to go crazy in over modifying what's there. It's sort of intricate. You have all of these pieces of the contract that fit together already, and it's best not to deviate too far from them. If you touch things in one area, something in another area may also need to change. Particular conditions must be drafted clearly and unambiguously. That's pretty much true of any contract. Number 3, particular conditions must not change the balance of risk reward allocation provided for in the general conditions. The exception in a powerhouse rehabilitation project is risk assessments and that sort of thing. But you don't, that's not a major, that's not a cardinal change to the yellow book. Number 4, all time periods specified in the contract for contract participants to perform their obligations must be of reasonable duration. Some clients cannot pay within a certain time window. They require something a little longer. There are internal processes, which is fine. You can extend these things or even shrink a few, but whatever you do, you got to be reasonable. And unless, number 5, unless there's a conflict with the governing law of the contract, for all disputes, we're getting back to the Disputes Avoidance Adjudication Board. They strongly recommend such a thing. I know of many owners that are still somewhat leery of these, but in 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I could understand those reservations, but I think what I'm seeing in recent years, this whole dispute avoidance element of it gives you a far more educated dispute adjudication board. So a disputes review board, they're not, the project is not cold to them. So I wholeheartedly recommend Golden Principle 5 as well. Common mistakes, how to overcome them. I addressed, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip through a number of these. These are a repeat of my procurement slides, but you may find some of these useful as you head toward preparing particular conditions and the rest of your bidding documents. Risk registers are useful. They map who's going to own what risk. Another mistake commonly made is making sure everybody's on board with it, getting input from all your stakeholders. That's probably less of an issue on a powerhouse, more of an issue on transmission lines. But I'll move on from there. I often see permitting requirements, if applicable, insurance requirements, and late relocations. These are very common delays that occur early on to soliciting bids. And of course, time is money. You want to make sure those are addressed early. They're often overlooked as being not that important. We'll deal with that later. No, it'll catch up with you faster than you will know. Uncertainty of scope. you need to make yourself absolutely clear. Again, I discussed enough about powerhouse rehab projects and getting things like unknown interface requirements near existing infrastructure. You definitely want to have a condition assessment and a game plan. What happens? Some clients, when they go to overhaul multiple units, will buy the guts of an extra unit, which they then use when they run into a problem. They have something already on site they could insert into the unit. And then they'll order another one for the next unit as they go along. So you end up with spares at the end of the process there. I need to avoid getting too deep into this. Let me fly through that. Internal constraints. The main thing is when it comes to coordinating legal aspects and technical aspects, or between technical people, the analogy I like drawing is view everything as an orchestra. All these, you may have parts of the orchestra that are the violins and such, but they got to be in sync with the horns. If the different parts of the orchestra are making excellent music on their own, it may sound like a bunch of noise when you put them together. And whoever, you definitely want people who oversee both the commercial development, anything any lawyer would do, and also oversee the technical element there. You can't let people work in their own silos. And lawyers love to work in their own silos. They don't know what the back of the book is. And engineers love their silos. They don't care what's in the front of the book. That's the wrong attitude to have. Okay, we're quickly running out of time. Sample Powerhouse Rehabilitation Project, Pakistan. If you'd like another webinar on particular conditions, we can hit on that separately. Just talk to Carlos about that. Mangla was built in the 1960s. It's shown in the brown area of that map on the left side of your screen, and a very mountainous area there. When it was built, it was one of the world's 5 largest power plants in the 1960s. That's since been eclipsed many times over. But a lot of these units are now 50, 60 years old and at the end of their useful life. And they're a little older than what you have at Salto Grande. And interesting challenge they have is they have 4 different manufacturers of the 10 different units there. They couldn't afford to put them all in initially. So they have that added complication that occurs there. And again, this uses the yellow book, this particular project. Lower cost does not generally mean best value. These are distinctives of the project that need to be considered. Multiple contracts, I'd like to talk about that only briefly. There's an advantage. You got to think, how are you going to approach any kind of Salto Grande rehab? To what extent might you self-perform certain things? The problem with multiple contracts is you have contractors running into each other, which you can overcome if you plan it well and if you manage it well. If you award it to a single contractor, however, you don't always get the best equipment in all the different areas there. And because there's so much value in the powerhouse itself, you do want that greater oversight. So How it's contracted can be tricky and is something you may want to consider. And there may be elements of a rehabilitation that you might want to do yourself, and in the process train local staff how to be better operators and all, as being a part of that effort. Something to think through. I'm going to skip through most of the rest. Space, of course, is always at a premium inside the powerhouse and staging areas. Many power plants only have one erection bay. You're going to have contractors fighting over it. You also have your own O&M needs. Who's going to own the overhead crane, for example? Those things need to be thought through, and the rules of engagement need to be defined. They not necessarily in the particular conditions, but definitely in your employer's requirements, somewhere between the two of them. There's protection of equipment, and you may want to be proactive there. Need for cleanliness. Contracts need to have a robust cost of work clause. That is, if all else fails, you may have optional prices for certain items, but if all else fails, you just simply agree that it's a time and materials work that needs to occur. Your contract's got to be flexible for changes. I already mentioned high value as compared to the cost of it. The benefits you're receiving will always be much greater than your actual cost of the work. You'll certainly recover that money quickly, so you want to make sure your decisions, you're not messing yourself over. You may want to think of replacements as opposed to refurbishing. Sometimes that's just a lot faster, and when in doubt, our team often prefers replacement. Adequate contingencies should be maintained. That's just overall planning. A major element is liquidated damages and delay LDs, which you get out of any project. Performance liquidated damages. I think Mike Morganroth might have covered this on an earlier webinar. You'll have different performance guarantees out of the different suppliers, of course, and you'll want to make sure those are measured for, and that there's a financial penalty associated with that. By the way, when you work on back to delay LDs, it costs you quite a bit of money to keep units out of service. You cannot expect to recover that lost power generation from the contractor. His contract is not going to be worth the delay LDs there. So the idea is you want to minimize your delay LDs. You don't want them to be ridiculous. You want a collaborative effort to keep delays down to a minimum. And there are other forms of guarantees, cavitation issues as well, which are measured much further down the road. And I mentioned the bottom already. Consider market and individual for individual and cumulative LDs. Again, we can't be bankrupting contractors. That does you no good. Okay, other useful resources. This is my last slide. I flashed this up before during my procurement presentation. The website for FIDIC is right there. And you may want to go through their entire site. But I modified what I had previously for the procurement items to cover certain guidance memoranda, what they're doing with COVID and lack of availability of goods because of what's happening in the Ukraine and other things. There are a number of good guides there, and also while most things, except for the major publications, some of these are available free of charge. For some of the things they charge, you might find some of the same things on the World Bank website and or one of the other banking institutions, and sometimes those are available free of charge. I jotted down my favorite reference here. Corbett writes, wonderful books. This is something worth procuring, and you could go to Corbett and Company's website and order this if you already know you're using the yellow book. If you want to hear the downside of FIDIC in his perspective, I painted largely a rosy picture here of FIDIC, and it is largely rosy. It is a good way to go, but this guy has an uncanny way of reducing these things into simple English and explaining the different concepts there that'll help you well beyond the FIDIC publications. And he takes you through the FIDIC contracts, clause by clause, shortcomings and that sort of thing, and giving you advice as you draft your own conditions. And I'm going to end it right there. I understand the translator may need a break right now. Sorry, I've eaten into your time a little, Christian, here, but we're going to give the translator a break, and I'm going to hold off any questions to the very end of the your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dietmar. We'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll start with Christian, and then we will have the sessions for Q&A.
What I could ask for is if we can limit the break maybe a little bit less, because I've got to cover 2 sections.
Okay.
And a little bit extra time will be quite positive.
Okay, we'll take then 5 minutes break, Christian, and we'll start right at our time 11:06 right now.
Okay.
Dietmar, would you be comfortable that I use my own slides, because then I can control the slides easier?
Yeah.
So let me try and get that sorted out so that we know that we're not having a problem.
Yeah.
Let me make sure.
Thanks for showing me that one item.
No problem. I just want to make 100% sure that. How do I undo share screen? Okay, let me just. Screen 2, you're going to see yourself there for a moment, and then I will hopefully
there you go.
Get myself sorted out here. Just make sure I start with the right one. Okay, is that the right screen you've got there?
Yep, that looks good.
All right. Good.
Yeah, I see attendees on the right. Okay. Is that how mine appeared also when I was presenting?
Okay. Don't you see my presentation?
Oh, yes, I see it. Okay, yes, I see your presentation fine. The setting is on mine. Okay.
Yeah.
No,
so
that looks good.
Make 100% sure is you see this side where I'm scribbling on.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Oh, you're gonna have to show me how to do that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. All right.
You
Okay,
young.
no, that's
guy,
great then. No, I've been doing these things and we're using it anyway standard on the project for briefings when the guys are on and off site, and in our twice weekly briefing we're using Zoom, so I'm quite comfortable with Zoom.
It's amazing how good a job Mike Newman does with his presentations. I'm always blown away.
Mhm.
And that guy is so talented in so many
Yeah,
different
no, it's good.
areas.
No, it
Oh,
is.
yeah. We're so
Mhm.
blessed to have him.
Yep. Yeah, no, we are definitely. All right. Let me see, I've got those guys there and I've got my stuff there. So hopefully all well. Gabriel, are you online at this stage?
He's muted.
Yeah, or he just took a break. Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, my map looks a little like that too. Much more so also on the other side of the ocean.
Yeah.